So the next speaker, Ajahn Thitinan. Ajahn Thitinan will focus on the regional context, right? Myanmar's relationship with ASEAN, and maybe a comparison what happened between in Myanmar and in Thailand right now, bilateral relation between Myanmar and Thailand as well, and also the China factors, India's, the GMS. That okay, that will give us another aspect of what we should look for. Thank you.
Thank you, ขอบคุณครับอาจารย์พงษ์ทอง There are 4 parts to my talk. I want to talk first about the Myanmar Promised Land deliverance, what it means for Myanmar, for the region, and for the international context. And then to look at the new Myanmar in a regional context in ASEAN and within ASEAN in a broader global canvas of the major powers. Third, I want to look at the comparative politics of Southeast Asia in light of Myanmar's transition to a new government, what it means for democracy and dictatorship in the region and beyond. And then finally, I will look at the challenges for Myanmar going forward. I think that it's very fragile, but fragile in a positive direction. And then what it means for Thailand. Let me start with a personal note. I first met Harn Yawngwhe in 1994. I don't know if you remember, but in 1994, you know, it was an exciting time, the end of the Cold War, and Indochina was changing from battlefield to marketplace, and then these regional countries. At that time, there was only 6. There were 6 in ASEAN, 5 plus 1, the original 5. Brunei came in 1984, and there was no new members for a long time. Early 1990s, a lot of talk about new membership. So Vietnam joined in 1994. And in 1993-94, as a young new academic, and one of the first conferences we had that I joined was in Chiang Rai. Chiang Rai, Ajahn Kusuma organized it, and Han came, and I was intrigued because he was a prince. You know, going to a seminar with a prince is quite something. So in Chiang Rai, at the Rimco Hotel, we had this talk about Burma ASEAN. At that time, China was still just emerging as a major power. It had been, you know, through civil war, imperialism, and so on until the 1949, and then 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it was sorting itself out. 1994-95, China joined the WTO. Early 1990s, China was becoming a bit more assertive. We had an issue with China in the South China Sea, the Spratlys. I think it was Mischief Reef at that time, now all kinds of reefs and rocks, but at that time, the Mischief. And then China was trying to deal with ASEAN, and ASEAN was trying to deal with China. So the thinking in ASEAN at that time was that you had to enlarge ASEAN. You had to bring Burma into ASEAN, because otherwise it would go to China. So Burma applied, at that time we called Burma, and Vietnam joined 1994. Burma applied to be observer. Burma signed the TAC, the Treaty of Amity, in 1995. 96 became an observer. 97 joined ASEAN. At that time, Burma was under SLOC, if you remember, the State Law and Order Restoration Council, before it became the SPDC, State Peace and Development Council. And you know, it was an exciting time because ASEAN then became 7th with Vietnam, 8, 9 with Laos and Myanmar. Cambodia was supposed to join in 1997, but it had some instability because of the coup attempt, so it was delayed to 1999. So I thought, you know, we were excited to have this one Southeast Asia, 10 countries. SLOC was a repressive regime, and we know that they robbed Burmese people of the elections in 1990. So SLOC was kind of an albatross, and for us in ASEAN, over time after joining, Burma became an albatross. Burma became the sick member. So when I say deliverance, you know, it's really come a long way. Really come a long way. This is a promised land, and if you watch Hollywood movie franchises, you know, the sequel, the second part and the third part, never as good as the first part. So the first part is the best part. This is when Aung San Suu Kyi was the democracy icon, you know, from 1990 to 21 years of being really internally exiled at home for 15 or 21 years. And it was the glory years of democracy fighting in Myanmar. She had that was the first part of her political life. Second part was when she became a politician after the reforms 2011, 2010, 2011. So as a politician, she did okay. I think it could have been better. She didn't really build up her party, but she got elected in a by-election. Now it's the third stage of her life, and we will enter the Myanmar-Burma sequel, second part. The Godfather was best in the first part. Second part is remarkable that they made the Godfather part 2 as good as part 1, but part 3 was no good. So when it comes to Burma, Myanmar, and second part, I'm afraid it's not going to be as robust, as clear-cut as the first part. I think it will be rather messy. But nevertheless, they've come a very long way, and we have to recognize that. Now, during that time, ASEAN had a policy of constructive engagement. And constructive engagement for a long time was criticized. Even I criticized constructive engagement. I remember writing in 1994 that you have to be careful. Someday, Aung San Suu Kyi could take power, and she'll remember who was with her and who was not. And I think that Aung San Suu Kyi will know that ASEAN has not been with her all through those difficult years, the years of adversity, the year of isolation, the year of fighting for democracy as an icon, winning the Nobel Prize, and so on. So this is my second part about Myanmar's new era and what it means for ASEAN. I think there will be some uneasiness, and we will see it very quickly next week with the ASEAN-Russia summit. Earlier, when they had the Sunnyland summit, Myanmar didn't send a top leader; they sent a deputy. But now they're ready. She's a de facto leader of the country as a state councillor, and I thought it was clever to have this state councillor office and now a ministry. But this means that she will be front and center in major ASEAN meetings and summits. Before, Myanmar, Burma was the problem. It was a sick member. ASEAN had to cancel meetings with the ASEM and several times, at the AMM, at the ministerial levels, a number of times. In 2006, when Myanmar was supposed to chair ASEAN, it had to skip because it was so unpopular. It was so disliked, repulsive to a lot of the other countries, especially in Europe and America. But now, Aung San Suu Kyi is the leader of Myanmar. She'll go to these meetings with Tin Chaw. And it'll be very strange for the other ASEAN leaders. She'll be in the limelight. And she's not one who is going to sit and be quiet. She's not going to be a potted plant at these meetings. So it will be, I think, we've never been here before. She'll lead ASEAN in many ways. She'll lead ASEAN in many ways because she's outspoken. She's very, very lucid in her articulation, her views, her opinions. At the same time, she's not so experienced. Her first visit abroad was to Laos after becoming state councillor, which is interesting. Laos is ASEAN chair, so it's very understandable. Her first reception of a foreign leader was Wang Yi of China, which was a bit counterintuitive. China was not a Aung San Suu Kyi fan or friend through the adversity years, but yet she was practical enough and pragmatic to meet with Wang Yi first. Now she'll be meeting with the other ASEAN leaders, and this is something about ASEAN this year will be very challenged. You can imagine a room. I don't know what Duterte will have to say to Kowi, and then you've got Aung San Suu Kyi with Tin Chaw around. She might not be in the room. They haven't sorted this out, I don't think. And then you have General Prayut, who will also be there. And then you have the new leaders from Vietnam and Laos, Najib, embattled PM of Malaysia. So they will be in this room. Unlike the past, In the past, ASEAN leaders had certain camaraderie and esprit de corps in the 1970s, 80s, even 1990s. 2010s, they are from different backgrounds and on different wavelengths. It will be challenging for them to come to terms, and I think for ASEAN, this is a pull factor. I think that it will be difficult for ASEAN to be as cohesive with the kind of momentum that they need in these meetings, and this year it will be a difficult year for ASEAN on many fronts, apart from the South China Sea challenges and China and so on. Now, Myanmar under Aung San Suu Kyi will have a different mix of relationships with the major powers. If you were to list, and we've done this kind of informally in various conversations in the past with Gwen, and her favorite country must be the UK, right? I mean, there must be the number one country for her. And then closely followed by the US. And then closely followed by the Scandinavians, maybe the Swiss or the Norwegians. They have stood by her over the years. Now, in the bottom of the totem pole will be like Thailand, China, ASEAN. And when you have this new Myanmar with Aung San Suu Kyi in a new promised land, it'll be difficult for ASEAN to deal with major powers. So in the South China Sea, you already see a split in ASEAN, and that split will deepen because China is really inflicting its own injury by dividing ASEAN, by calling in the chips with Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, and you will see this year that I don't think we will have much progress on the code of conduct in the South China Sea. Laos will do all it can to avoid the mistake of 2012 when Cambodia chaired and was unable to come out with a joint statement. But nevertheless, ASEAN will have a difficult year with the new Myanmar. India will have probably a little bit of a bigger role, but India is I think they have a resource gap. Their profile is there, but the resources to back up the profile is not quite there. China will have a difficult time with Aung San Suu Kyi's Myanmar. And I think the opening, even the SPDC, the USDP, I think saying part of the opening, the reforms, was designed to wean away a little bit from China. And you're seeing the other countries following similar path now too. Vietnam joining TPP as also an attempt to kind of reduce its dependence on China. Even Thailand, beholden to China after the coup, is trying to go the Japan way in order to hedge. So this will be interesting because the US and UK will gain more leverage with Aung San Suu Kyi's Myanmar in ASEAN, but China will be tested. I think the Chinese will have to think a lot and rethink about how to deal with ASEAN with Aung San Suu Kyi in a leading role. Myanmar, in comparative terms now, in terms of democratization, being a democracy, they had a remarkable free and fair elections in November 8th, 2015. Took some time for the transition, and the NLD won a huge landslide. And the surprise, not that the NLD won, but it won big in ethnic minority areas. That was something we didn't anticipate. This means now that if you look at democracies, democratization, and authoritarianism in Southeast Asia, the record is mixed. So Indonesia now is more or less consolidated, and I think they're going from strength to strength. Jokowi is, I think, coming into his own, becoming a statesman-like a little bit more, and if he can continue and build on it, he can perhaps gain a second term, secure a second term, which will allow him to rule for 10 years. So Indonesia is really at the forefront. Myanmar is right behind. But in Myanmar, it's fragile, the democratic transition, very fragile. It's fragile like Thailand is fragile, but in a different way. Myanmar is fragile in a democratic way. Thailand is fragile in an authoritarian way. So in Myanmar, the fragility is that, if Aung San Suu Kyi if she overdoes it, she overplays, she tries to amend the constitution so that she becomes president, and she rubs the military the wrong way. She violates the quasi de facto civil military compromise that they've had, whereby the military controls 25% from the constitution. They control interior, defense, border ministries. If she violates all of that, and being all about her, then this could tip, this could fall over. I don't see them reverting, going back to the dictatorship years, but it'll just be a very messy place with the unhappy, unsatisfied military misbehaving or going after its own interests, and NLD not quite able to govern, Aung San Suu Kyi all about herself. So there's a fragility there. In Thailand, the fragility is opposite, is that you have a military government that they could overplay by becoming too repressive, too authoritarian, and therefore they might foment an uprising, protests, demonstrations, and so on. So it go in different directions. In Philippines, they have now a new leader, which I think will be not as bad as we thought, but maybe still not so good. I'm not sure. It's just an unknown quantity. Rodrigo Duterte, very intriguing what that will mean for the Philippines, but beyond the Philippines, what it will mean for ASEAN and ASEAN's relations with the outside world. Cambodia, you're seeing more repression, and Cambodia and Malaysia in the same boat as kind of Thailand, more authoritarian characteristics, less democratic, less basic civil liberties, media freedom, and so on. So if you take a lecture in Southeast Asia, I think it's very important. It is critical, vital, that Myanmar makes it. If Myanmar doesn't make it, despite Indonesia's substantial progress, it will be a setback for regional democratization and democratic transitions in the region and the broader world. We have expected so much, and now they're here. Myanmar is democracy now. And if this democracy doesn't work in Myanmar, it will send all kinds of wrong signals to many other states that, democracy just doesn't work. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the challenges. The Myanmar timeless challenge to me has always been history and geography. It's a proud, martial nation with a warrior culture. The Burma majority in the central plains, the central Burma, and the ethnic minority groups in the peripheries. And over time, through the decades and centuries, they always had to have a strong center to hold the place together, because they always had rebellions. If you look at the Burmese kings in the past, they've spent most of the time suppressing rebellions and then, internal feuds. So now, with a democracy, a democratic center, the center-periphery relations are going to be difficult. If you have a very strong center, you can keep the periphery in line. And the center is not weak, but it's a different kind of center now. And if she's talking about decentralization and so on, good governance and so on, then the center will not be as strong as a military dictatorship. And this means for the minority areas, it will be not smooth. It will be uneasy. Now, beyond history, geography meaning that, most of the country, the mountains, Burma and Thailand are the opposite. So Thailand, we have about 25% mountains, 75% flat plains, central plains. In Myanmar, they have, 75% mountains and 25% central plain. And when you have the geography like that, mountainous peoples are difficult to govern. As you know from a very good book, The Art of Not Being Governed. And this means for Myanmar going forward, the geography, the history of being a superior warrior culture, now having to contend with minority groups that they have, democratic rights and so on. It'll be a big challenge. Development will be a big challenge for them. Development, Myanmar is resource rich. They have to be very careful about being resource cursed. So when you get easy money from natural gas and extractive industries, how to reinvest, how to use that money to sustain and build education system, infrastructure, and so on and so on. This is a big challenge, and it has to happen in a very short time. They had a 50-year timeout, and now you get back into the game of development in 2016. Everything has to happen in short order. You got 5 years, 10 years. So everything has to be leapfrog, it'll be compressed, there'll be kind of a time warp to it. Big challenges on development. I'm afraid that they have to be very careful about the distribution of income, what comes in, how it's distributed. They have to avoid the disparity that you see in newly emerging frontier economies, where you have new wealth coming in, new money, and it goes to very few people. Technology is not a big challenge. Technology means that people now have a lot of expectations because they just know more. So people in the mountains, they will have access to mobile phone, but they won't have electricity, and they won't have running water, irrigation, and so on. And this is a challenge because there's a runaway expectation that their lives have to be better because they see it, right? They can hear it, they can listen to it, they can see it from the satellite dish televisions, the mobile phones, and so on. But then their real lives, not so great. Electricity is lacking, infrastructure, jobs, and so on. So the challenge of expectations from technology, and the technology challenge is global. I think now we are in an era of mass empowerment driven by technology. In Myanmar's case, it will be much more challenging for the new democratic regime, new government, NLD-led, civilian-led, to meet expectations because people will want more and they want it quickly. Beyond that, there's a leadership challenge. And a leadership challenge, it means really that Aung San Suu Kyi, she's the state counselor. She's like the de facto, effectively the president, even though Tin Chaw is the president. She's above the president. But to do it right, it's almost like she has to start thinking about what kind of legacy she wants to leave behind, rather than what kind of government she wants to run. Which means that she has to start bringing up people. And we're not seeing that. So I think that's a challenge, and that's a concern, because she has to see the country much more than herself. And now it's still too much about herself and less about the country. Of course, she would like to think that the two are symbiotic, but going forward, it's almost like she has to start thinking about a new generation of leaders. And she would have to start soon to take a backseat role, kind of a shadow role, to oversee the big issues, the ceasefire agreement, development, infrastructure, income, jobs, but not in a direct way. So leadership comes down to very simple human conditions about the sense of sacrifice. She has fortitude, there's no doubt. But having wisdom, having a sense of sacrifice, seeing the country more than herself, this is a big challenge for Aung San Suu Kyi. And the age at this time, if she was doing this in 1990, early 1990s, when she was still in her late 40s, 50s, she can try to govern the country despite the lack of experience. But now at 70, she really has to start thinking about what kind of legacy she wants to leave behind, what kind of big issues she wants to look after, not the minute, not the micro, but the macro, with a sense of sacrifice. So I think that that's a big challenge for the country, the role of leadership. The compromise that we've seen, we tend to overlook. The military has made a lot of concessions. You know, they're so heinous in the past. We hate the SLORC, the SPDC, Yawngwhe. These are kind of villains, but they made a lot of concessions. There has been a civil-military compromise in Myanmar, and this compromise has to hold, which means that the military has to be able to keep some of its corporate interests. You know, you cannot expect them to go away overnight. There is an incentive to help, to encourage the military to build the USDP. So USDP is a military party. It's better to have the military party than the Tatmadaw. So institutionalized USDP in the longer term for the future of democratic Myanmar, better to have the USDP becoming a real political party with policy platform, with constituencies, with internal organization, succession modality, and so on, than to have it kind of a shallow, superficial party, because the military is not going to go away. Better to have them engaged in the democratic arena than to do it through military ways and means. For Thailand, there are many issues, a lot of implications for Thailand. On labor, as we know, there are a lot of migrant workers in Thailand. The Thai authorities have to start thinking about systematizing, streamlining labor laws vis-a-vis migrant workers. You know, now in Yangon, there is a growing demand for drivers, gardeners, cooks, maids. There are some jobs in Yangon, and there will be more jobs around the country. In the ethnic areas, I think it will be less. But you know, the Thai authorities, they are always behind the curve, but they have to start thinking that if all the Myanmar migrant workers go home, if they all go home, more than 3 million of them, what will happen to the Thai economy? Well, wages will skyrocket. A lot of people will be unhappy. A lot of people have to do their own housework. Maybe it will be good for Thai crisis, you know. Then they can start thinking, maybe this is my kind of personal cynicism to myself, so that they can wake up. Thailand is so good. If these workers go home, maybe it will be a good wake-up call. But it could happen that some of them will start going back. And the Thai authorities are thinking, they have to start thinking about how to streamline worker guidelines, policies, and laws in order to make it fair and in order to make it attractive. There are other issues that I don't want to take too much time. I mean, you know, Myanmar is an example for Thailand. Civil-military compromise cannot be all civilian, cannot be all military. So in the past, Myanmar was too much military, not enough civilian. Now it's a lot of civilian, some military, but it must not go too far. In Thailand now, too much military, not enough civilian, and the military will have to kind of be constrained and reverse a bit, but not too far. It's an ongoing compromise that Myanmar has it now. Thailand will need it later, but it's an ongoing situation, and Thailand can learn from Myanmar here, where the Myanmar military is still very dominant and they still control certain ministries. And there are other issues we can talk in the Q&A. I don't want to take too much time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thitinan. Well, yeah, of course, there's many challenges waiting for Myanmar, right? But at least now Myanmar is no longer a sick guy of ASEAN. Who is it? We all know who is a sick guy of ASEAN right now, right? I don't want to talk about it. So let's see whether the godmother party in Myanmar will go well. Ajahn Thitinan talking about the role of Aung San Suu Kyi in ASEAN. Right? Whether she will, how she's going to react to ASEAN is something that we're going to see soon in the next meeting of ASEAN. And I think it would be interesting to see her role, her active role in ASEAN, since ASEAN is always a male-centric organization, right? So she may bring some new light to ASEAN. But imagine that to see Aung San Suu Kyi stand side by side with General Prayut, what will make of Thailand the national image? I don't want to think about it. It's scary for us. And here I'm talking about the one thing that's interesting is the leadership challenge in Myanmar. Aung San Suu Kyi has sacrificed herself in fighting for democracy in Myanmar for 2 decades. Now it's the next sacrifice whether she'll be able to take a back seat. Actually, she just stepped into the front seat recently, so it's quite hard. I think it's quite difficult to ask her to thinking about taking a back seat in order to build up a new generation of leadership. This is another big sacrifice, big challenge for Aung San Suu Kyi as well. So the next, our last speaker, Gwen, of course, she will focus on the economy and business climate. And we see more good news about the Western investor and administration going to Myanmar. But if there are any bottlenecks that business sector have to pay attention to, can you tell us?
Thanks, Ajahn. Actually, you think it's amusing to think of Aung San Suu Kyi and General Prayut meeting up, or her and Duterte, but imagine if Donald Trump gets to the White House. I'm looking forward to seeing the first bilateral meeting between the State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and President Trump, but I hope it doesn't come to that. Anyway, I've been watching Myanmar for the last 6 years, since this last administration took hold and implemented, began implementing an extraordinary program of reform, which were genuine reforms and really did bring the country up to this point. And I'd just like to look at, given that it's still very early days, so I think it's difficult to assess, but there's plenty of early signs about the way things are going now in Myanmar. You know, there's a lot of glass half full and glass half empty views, but clearly one can say on the economic front, it's very good news for the NLD that I think Aung San Suu Kyi and her party have inherited a fairly healthy growth path in Myanmar with, I mean, record 8%. It's actually the fastest growing economy, or one of the fastest growing economies in the world at the moment, topping 8% in the past year, and also reached last year record FDI, foreign direct investment, of $8 billion, which is absolutely staggering if you consider the speed with which this country has come up since those dark days when they're actually, you know, throwing people in jail and shooting people on the streets, and there was only less than 200,000 tourists some years ago, and this year I think they're projecting something incredible like 4 million. So that gives you an idea of how rapid, well, we all know how rapid it has been. So in Myanmar's kind of whirlwind trajectory, to actually wake up and find, you know, someone who was a political prisoner just a few years ago now sort of ostensibly running the country is, you know, also good news for a lot of people. Now, of course, we have this civilian-dominated government as well for the first time since early post-colonial era, led by the country's most popular figure, and it all looks very good. And actually, when you visit Myanmar these days, no matter what, and I agree with some of my fellow speakers that the local media has been surprisingly critical, which is good, that 5 years ago you had a very docile, scared media that would never report anything, and it swung possibly a bit too much the other way, you know, sort of empowered by new freedoms that were brought in by the previous administration. So there is quite a lot of criticism. but it's all within a certain framework. When you're there and you talk to almost anyone, even old cronies that have sort of now out of power or not making the money they used to, but everybody does recognise that they have had a say in a government that has as its de facto leader an extraordinarily popular person who is by choice of the people. But as I've said before, it's a little bit like one of those kids' games, which is, what is wrong with this picture? It looks perfect, but actually when you look at it, there's all these weird little things about it. It's odd. Things do not add up. So what we've got here is one of the most dysfunctional pseudo-democracies that you could possibly imagine. And it's all predicated on what my colleague Dr. Thitinan calls the civil-military compromise. There are clearly creeping internal tensions. It's largely due to this distorted system enshrined in the Constitution, and I think also partly to do with the National League for Democracy's own inexperience, its goals, and its sort of basic activist nature. This was only ever a party set up as opposition to the military with a very strong focus on human rights. And up to a year ago, it was very hard to interview anyone at the NLD about economic policies. They did not have a clue. There was very few. I don't think on the Central Executive Committee, as they call their ruling kind of Politburo, there was one economist. They've come a long way in the last year. They've even got a think tank that deals with economic issues, draws up papers, gives advice. But we all know that the woman at the top is not big on just adopting advice. She's got a lot of inputs, but it's a good sign that there is a lot of stress. I mean, she is very well aware of the promises that have been made to people, and I'll go into that later. But so we've got this very inexperienced party, and we've got this very strange, odd and fixed role of the military, controlling 25% of Parliament under automatic allocation. And that's not just national Parliament, that's also state and region. So everywhere you go, there's a state or regional Parliament with, you know, a big proportion of military in there, well, a quarter. And also 3 of the most important seats in the national, in the cabinet. So as Richard, I think, said, all the key kind of security-related roles, not just military and defence, but let's not forget, it also includes police and prisons. So those political prisoners you saw released when the NLD came into power, that was done through an extra special authority as the incoming party. They pardoned these prisoners, but on the whole, the military controls that, and also, crucially, through an arm of the Home Affairs Ministry, which is controlled by the military, it controls the pervasive General Administration Department, which actually, it basically runs everything from waste collection in the village to, you know, municipal halls. It is the local government administrative arm, the bureaucracy, which answers to a general, an active general. So the NLD has that to contend with as well. But we can go into structures later if anyone's curious about more detail. So you've got that, and at the same time, against this backdrop of lack of trust between these two polar forces in this new administration, military and NLD, you've got the implosion of the former ruling USDP, which was routed at the polls in November. I think it's got less than, what is it, Richard, 40 seats in Parliament? Less than 40 seats out of 664 in a combined national Parliament. That's not much. And you've got some very bitter people who are out of power, trying to find ways to, you know, get back in power. A lot of people who've lost out on cosy deals, money or political power. At the same time, you've got, as Harn has referred to, ethnic groups who want far greater inclusiveness and consultation, but also as a political force, the ethnic groups were really not insignificant in the previous parliament, and in this election, even in their own constituencies, ethnic parties lost out big time. Their own people abandoned their parties to vote for the NLD. That is how popular, I think, Aung San Suu Kyi has been. But it was a big kick in the teeth, I think, Harn, was it? I think for a lot of ethnic parties, a big kick in the teeth. For them, they just assumed that they would have the vote. So there's a lot of internal tensions over a very sort of much smaller pie now amongst both the ethnics. So you've got these disparate elements. There are many more, but you know, that is not what you can call a very healthy democracy. And even the fact that, you know, the most popular politician in the country, who is clearly Aung San Suu Kyi, who clearly was the reason the NLD got this landslide of votes, cannot, has absolutely no claim on leading the country and has to put in this proxy president, is also rather bizarre, as we saw in the first visit abroad of the president, was it last week, or yeah, I think last week, to Laos as a presidential visit, with, you know, his state councillor and foreign minister just sort of stepping just behind him. But clearly they all wanted to speak to her. She was calling the shots. He kind of stood there very graciously, said the right things, but you know, it is a slightly odd situation, which will probably become more awkward as she is on the international circuit a lot more, as this weird kind of hybrid foreign minister come leader. So obviously leaders of other countries will want to meet her as the leader, but actually she's only the foreign minister, and this vague thing called a state councillor, which has not been that clearly defined, and which she is clearly defining at the moment. So I think the defining thing in there and in this weird structure is lack of trust, not just between the polar opposites, but also within these various elements. And there's a huge task to actually rebuild this trust. I agree also with one of my fellow panelists who said it's, you know, it's, I think, quite important that there should be some focus on rebuilding a viable opposition, because what we also have is a one-party state, in effect, or a benign autocracy, democratic dictatorship, whatever you like to call it. This party controls executive and legislative branches. It can push through, it controls the supposed check and balance of the Constitutional Tribunal. So anything it presents to Parliament can be voted on, because on all matters except the Constitution, they only require a simple majority. Anyone can challenge a parliamentary vote, so the military can challenge, but who is the arbiter? It's a constitutional tribunal of 9 judges appointed by, guess what, the ruling party. So there's, you know, little check and balance beyond that. The big prize, of course, though, is out of her reach, and that's because of this supermajority requirement to change the constitution. I think overall, though, stepping back and looking as an investor or speaking to some of the economic experts looking at Myanmar, there is a lot of goodwill and optimism that broadly the instincts are right and the goals are right, and you know, there's a lot of expectation for solid reforms. I think, though, that beneath that surface, as all my panelists have implied, it's very fragile. And as Richard said, I think the impact administratively has been to reconcentrate power at the top. And what this is creating, because there's so much demand now at the top within the NLD government to control everything, vet everything, look at all the policy decisions. There's a lack of trust with the old bureaucracy. This is a new government that's inherited a bureaucracy that was basically nurtured and set up by the previous military-backed administration. She does not trust it. A lot of the permanent secretaries, there are 36 or 37, most of them are from a military background, hand-picked and put in by Thein Sein and his group. So in a way, a lot of these powerful new committees and structures being set up by the NLD, I think, look as though they're being set up to almost bypass the bureaucracy. There are uber committees being set up left, right and centre. There were 9 very powerful ones set up to I think a few days ago, but I gather there is one more very powerful economic committee being set up at the moment. And these will have a lot of power to make certain policy decisions, hand them to the bureaucracy as a done deal. Maybe this is a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, we didn't get, the bureaucracy was not sort of, stunningly impressive under the previous administration, so there definitely needs to be an overhaul. The trouble is, I think, haste. Everything is being done very quickly. Richard mentioned the 100-day program. It's a bit unfortunate that, this government feels, I think, that it needs to show very quickly that it means business and can get results. But also, as has been mentioned, its greatest enemy is expectations, which are sky high. It's got to show that it means business. It's got to show some wins. So I think this 100-day fixation is for very short-term showy things that they can turn around and say, look what we've done in this period. So you've got a lot of wildly unrealistic, or I think quite reckless decisions, such as orders to consolidate 36 ministries into about 21 or 22, all by, they're supposed to come up with and finalise a plan by June, which doesn't give much time to redraw, reconsolidate and reformulate a vast bureaucracy. The Finance Economic Planning Authority and Ministry has been told to recalibrate and redevise budgets for this reduced bureaucracy. At the same time, this government certainly does not want to be looking like it's slashing public sector jobs. So there's just this weird thing going on where they're trying to find roles for people at the same time as shrinking the size of government. Also, some decisions that I feel were made more for show, like, for example, announcing that they were eliminating all deputy ministers apart from in key portfolios, including for herself as Foreign Minister. There's deputy foreign ministers, there's a couple of deputies floating around, but basically that entire deputy level was eliminated ostensibly to save money, which is, given the pathetic level of wages in Myanmar, it's hard to buy that argument that you get rid of a few people so that you can save some money, but this was made much of. But I think the consequences of eliminating, with all this work to do and an incredible amount of promises that have been made, it's probably the wrong time, I'd say, to eliminate all these deputies who can be quite useful for overworked ministers. So I think there's a sort of dual trend going on, which is towards both streamlining top-down decision-making and structures, but at the same time playing to this earlier image of the NLD as a party of the people, so to appear consultative through the establishment of numerous bodies and the empowering of lots of, little groups to consult and set up, make reports, all this stuff. So I think, that is something to watch. It's creating a sort of almost a counterproductive dynamic in there. I won't even go into, I can go into the committees later if anyone's interested, but I think that's really something to watch, is this new growth of a kind of uber bureaucracy that is through these committees, and at the same time Aung San Suu Kyi herself, as I'm sure you're aware, started off taking 4 portfolios for herself, then deciding to slash that to 2 and coming out with what I think was quite a brilliant move to give herself a role, create a new role of state councillor, which now is really emerging, that I think she sees it really as a de facto prime minister role, and it gives her a right almost to dabble in both the legislative and executive side. And if she plays her cards right, it will be an extremely powerful role that will be really a de facto presidency. But, you know, further to that, she has now set up, apart from the office of the State Councillor, we've got something called the Ministry of the State Councillor, and there you have another whole new level of bureaucracy that's going to grow around this. How big it will be or how much it will reach into things, we don't know yet. But I think, you know, all this is understandable in this current environment with this glaring lack of trust I mentioned. Aung San Suu Kyi is formidable. She's determined to maximise her one shot at running the country. And, you know, this is really crucial to understand where she's coming from. This is her moment. She's 72 this year. She's only got this one shot. She's waited decades for this. She was furious and felt robbed, I think, that all her efforts to reform the Constitution failed. And so she's going to use every tool in the toolbox to extend and to shape this era as her era. And, you know, this is really something that I think people are just getting their heads around, particularly the military, which, as has been mentioned, is not happy at all. She has calculated with all these changes and her popularity that the military will not dare move against her. And it's certainly, I think, everyone I talk to, even on the military, the sort of old ruling party side, agree that it's gone too far for an old-style coup of shooting people in the street and throwing them in jail. What they can do is make life extremely difficult. You know, they do have complete power over security. They can launch, you know, offensives, they can undermine, they can obfuscate and block. And that is where perhaps a more conciliatory approach might be advisable, but she clearly has her own game plan. For investors, I think, as I said, there's a lot of goodwill there, huge on the part of the West, wariness on the part of China, which was a major economic force in Myanmar over all those years where it was a pariah state, invested in all the infrastructure, and as famously as I'm sure everyone here knows, these massive dam project that has been suspended, and that is going to be a very big decision for her about whether this Myitsone dam can recommence or not. There's a feeling inside Myanmar that the Chinese have been told and now accept that it will not, and there will be a quid pro quo where they will get some other very advantageous projects to offset the loss of Myitsone, and that would primarily be control over development of the Chao Pyu special zone on the west coast, which has the oil and gas pipelines running through to Kunming. China's got a lot of designs on that area. It's actually even much more interested in that, and possibly could wear the loss of Myitsone Dam, and she knows that. So I think, you know, that's a very big factor. And for Western investors, although the China hold has been seen as a negative, in some ways the fact that China might stick around, focus on SEZ development, whatever, is actually no bad thing for Western investors. At the same time, I think I'll finish soon, but I'll just want to make this point about a very important point in terms of the economic outlook and the investment outlook. Crucial is sanctions, and it does look, just the last few days, we've had indications from Washington that they will roll over the sanctions for this year and will not lift as most people had hoped. She's been very ambivalent. She has not urged strongly for the lifting of Western sanctions. By Western, I mean US. So the US still maintains the blacklist of individuals and companies that are off limits for US companies to do business with. This is not just for America. It's a huge disincentive for European companies that are multinationals. Any big company in the world, actually. Even the Japanese are a little bit concerned, but not enough to withhold investment. But I think for Europeans, it's a big factor, the US sanctions, because it still means that all US dollar transactions are hugely complicated with Myanmar, hugely. Things are blocked, frozen, and it's anomalous perhaps, but it does show a lot of caution in Washington at accepting or trusting that the Aung San Suu Kyi era is really bedded in. Otherwise, if they were so sure that it was absolutely set and all on, why would there not be a stronger push to lift those sanctions? So I think there'll be another year of this, which is a cloud for investors, because even though some brave US companies have gone ahead, there's a $60 million factory, American, now producing aluminium cans in Myanmar. There's a few other things. All the big iconic consumer brands are there, or a lot of them, KFC, Coca-Cola, etc. And there's some US companies doing various trading and other things, but it's still that final barrier being the ultimate remaining sanctions, and it looks like that will definitely be put off by at least a year. So I'd just like to end it there, and maybe we'll move to questions, and if you want to discuss that further. Thank you very much.
Apart from the US, I think people here would like you to, Gwen, to talk about the role of the World Bank and the IMF as well. The loan, whether Myanmar would be able to get the loan from the World Bank or the IMF to rehabilitate the country, to develop.
Oh yeah, well I think on the World Bank and IMF and all the other big IFIs, international financial institutions and UN agencies, complete goodwill. She had a meeting last week, I think, with 20 UN agencies and World Bank, IMF, etc., Asian Development Bank. There don't seem to be any, there does not seem to be any hesitation now in going ahead. The only big pool of money, I'd say, that is tied up and depends very much on what happens next is the Peace Fund monies that are from various EU. I think Richard and Harn probably know more about this than me, but I think there'll be a lot of that Peace Fund related money that will not really flow until they know more about how the whole messy situation is going. But I think we heard from Harn kind of quite a mixed view on that. So I don't know if you've got anything to say about that, Richard.
I mean, the Joint Peace Fund is very important because it's what will fund the structures of the peace process as well as some projects in conflict-affected areas. It's not a large amount of money. It's a critical funding stream for those structures, but it's not a big pot of money.